Okay, in this lab we will discuss the valve control module. The valve control module is a combination I/O module specially tailored for valve control applications. There are 6 general purpose I/O points, configurable as dry contacts, or digital inputs, or sync mode digital outputs, 2 source mode digital outputs, and 1 4 to 20 milliamp sync or source mode analog output. So the first thing with this lab, we're actually looking at the understanding that you have your TFIO module connected and that you've cycled power on the G4 flow computer, and that under TFIO module or IO interface you should have a TFIO module directory in the tree, and there's a TF DA VC or valve control. Okay. Underneath this valve control input, this is just letting me know that I do have the TFIO module connected, but I don't at this point have valve control turned on or instantiated in my flow computer. What I'm looking at here is my digital inputs. So I have 6 DIs, and you can see that J11 is digital input 1, J13 digital input 2, and so forth. On the digital inputs, this displays the current status of the digital input as to whether they are active or inactive. So I could just make a change here. If I wanted DI1 to be active or inactive, it would tell me, I'm sorry, not make a change, but it would tell me if DI1 was active at this point or not. Okay. If I jump over to analog or digital outputs, digital outputs displays the current status or state of each one of these guys also. So this is along the same lines of DO1 through DO8. DO active time, we're looking at a place in milliseconds where we can actually put in, it says the display, it displays the amount of time in milliseconds that the digital output was active. Okay, so and once again, or lastly here, the analog output. For this guy, it displays the analog output value in a percentage scale in milliamps. Okay, so we have percent of full scale and then the engineering units. And all of these things can be found under the help button. So if I fire this up, right here I've got IO subsystem valve control, so the help is context sensitive and should explain each one of the topics that we just went over. The next thing we need to do is go to our device ID and then jump over to the Applications tab. And I always come over and hit the Help button, and this will give me a list of where Totalflow recommends that you turn on certain applications. And so right here under G4, under 101 is Valve Control Application number 1. So back under Applications, I'm going to scroll down to Application 101 and change the type from spare to valve control. Be sure you send it. Okay, and so now what you'll see in the tree view on the left hand side is valve control will show up. Okay. Alright, so what we're looking at here is the actual value of differential pressure, static pressure, and flow, MCF per day. We have a place for us to type in a set point. So we would actually put in a set point that makes sense for that differential pressure, static pressure, and flow rate. So this is just a box, so we would go in and type in an actual value. Along the same lines, this is a value place where we can put in a high limit for DP, a low limit for DP, same for static, high and low, and flow rate, high and low. We can also put in a deadband. A lot of times you'll see a deadband of 2 or somewhere in those in that range, and so basically the deadband is how much room above and below the set point do we want to allow before we actually start to control the valve. And then a gain. And a lot of times you'll see a 1,000 or 3,000 as a default for gain. Okay. Over here on the left you can see that I have a high range and a low range. This is going to show the actual high and low limit of whichever variable I want to control off of. And so right down here under control mode, let's go down to flow rate and send it. And I'm going to go back up there. Under control mode, you could control off of differential pressure, static pressure, flow rate, or the nominations, and we'll cover that a little later in the section. So I've got flow rate selected, I sent it, and I'm going to go ahead and check the monitor button. Okay, and so what I'm looking at right now is my flow rate actual value is 317 and my flow set point is 325. So what we're looking at here is the actual set point, and I'm just a little bit off the set point. If I make a change to the flow rate, you can see how the valve now is the actual value is at 108, so I'm way off the set point. At this point it would try to go ahead and open the valve to get back up to the set point. I'm going to try to go the other direction here. Okay, so at this point now I'm above my set point quite a bit. So you can see my slider here. This is the actual value. It's setting at 451, and my set point is 325 still. And you can hear my valve is trying to go ahead and close back. Okay. Okay, let me go ahead and crank it back up. So I brought the flow rate back down some. Okay, and if you can hear that, I'm sitting at 358 on my flow. My set point is 325, and you can hear that my valve is only pulsing just a little bit. So the further away from the set point I was actually at, the longer the pulses were on the digital output to try to get the flow back into a decent range. And now that I'm actually closer to the set point, I'm getting shorter, smaller pulses. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and change my control mode back to none and send it. Okay, the other thing to look at is there is a step full open and ramp full open. So if you wanted to control the valve, you could just run the thing all the way from one side to the other. Also, the wiring, there is a wiring diagram that you can go to through our website or call tech support. Or basically you're going to have two ways to wire the unit. There's a Fairchild actuator and also some other types of valves that you may run into. So there's just a main wiring diagram on the TFIO. It's also in the TFIO module manual, has a wiring layout. But there's a couple of digital inputs that I mentioned earlier that you can use for full open and full close switches. So when the valve is full open, it'll trip the DI, and that'll feed back into the valve control module and give you a indication that you're fully open or fully closed. Okay. And like I said, we could also do an analog output if you wanted. Instead of a pulsed digital type control to your valve, you could have a sine wave or a curved analog 4 to 20 milliamp output signal to your valve from the valve control module. Okay. And there's a couple of parameters here that you'd want to pay attention to. Very important: valve location, upstream or downstream. And then a couple other things here. For example, the external event mode, fail, closed, or restart control. And then you would also want to fill out all of these guys, and realistically in the field you'd want to put values into these slots that made sense. So let me check the help file while we're here. And this should give you some hopefully some helpful information when you're making your choices. For example, DP shut-in, step time, controller output, and so forth. Okay, and that's just the help button down in the lower right-hand corner. And same way with your nomination, another way to control the unit, time and date, last period, current period. And once again, you can hit the help file here, and this should give you some explanation of the best way to go ahead and set up valve control off nominations. Okay, and the last thing that I didn't mention, underneath TFIO, there also under valve control is an advanced button, and here we have the DI's active status. So I could trip a DI open close, DO active status. So it says on this screen you're selecting the state that you want the digital output to be in when active. So when it's active, do you want it to be open or closed? So we can essentially change the action here. Okay. So this concludes valve control on the G4 Flow computer.